Five works written in prison. Number 5. To Althea, from prison, Richard Lovelace. Richard Lovelace was one of the dashing young cavaliers of the English Civil War and is classed with the metaphysical poets. Sent to prison for presenting a royalist petition in support of pro-royalist bishops, he used the time to compose this, his most famous poem. Written to a possibly fictional lover, the poem expresses a theme common to much of the literature composed in jail: you cannot imprison the human mind. Number 4. De Profundis, Oscar Wilde. While Lovelace found love set him free, it was, for Wilde, love which led to confinement. After a series of trials relating to his relationships with Lord Alfred Douglas and other men, Wilde was sentenced to 2 years' hard labor for gross indecency. While held in prison and reading, Wilde composed a long letter to Douglas which was later published posthumously as De Profundis. The work starts with an account of Wilde and Douglas' relationship and how damaging it has been to Wilde. The tone is not accusatory but self-revelatory. The letter then turns towards the realizations that prison has forced on Wilde. Wilde ends with his plans for the future, for, though we know his life would be cut short. Number 3. Rawley. Rawley traces the history of the world from creation to the Third Macedonian War in 168 BC. The book serves to show how a man's mind, though his body is held captive, can travel over time and space. Rawley never finished his history, though he was released, and was later beheaded. His history includes this meditation on death. Number 2. The Travels of Marco Polo, Rustichello da Pisa. Marco Polo left Italy with his father and uncle in 1271 and returned in 1295. In those years of travel, Polo traveled to the then poorly understood Far East. On Polo's return to Italy, he was captured by the Genoese and held captive. While in prison, he related his adventures to fellow prisoner Rustichello da Pisa. Rustichello wrote down what he heard, and soon copies of the tale spread throughout Europe. For centuries, the travels of Marco Polo were the best information the West had about China. While Polo's account can be questioned in some aspects of veracity, it has certainly proved influential. Contact with China had existed, certainly in trade in the days of ancient Rome, before Polo, but with the dissemination of his book, fascination with the exotic East was born. Other Europeans had traveled to China before Polo, but none left as detailed an account. Perhaps a jail term to write would have secured them a place on this list. Number 1. Lamour, dArthur, Thomas Mowry. England has a rich history of Arthurian mythology which has inspired writers for hundreds of years. While imprisoned, Thomas Mowry wrote, using French sources, the most famous version of Arthurian legend. We are not entirely sure of the biography of Mowry. There are several competing candidates for the identity of the author, but we know from the work itself that it was composed in prison. Lamour, dArthur has given the world some of the best-known images of Arthur, such as the pulling of the sword from the stone and the Lady of the Lake, her arm covered in shimmering samite.